All right. Are you ready for a deep dive into the world of genes and inheritance?
Always.
You've provided some pretty interesting biology material.
Yeah.
So we're going to be exploring some cool genetic conditions and disorders,
Yeah.
and even touch upon how they can sometimes be surprisingly beneficial.
Oh, interesting.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So this deep dive is going to be based on, well, I'm not going to name it exactly, but it's from a source about autosomal inheritance.
Okay.
And we're going to see just what we can learn about how our genes can cause both problems. A and D, unexpected advantages.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Okay. So to kick things off, let's imagine a boy in 1649 who goes to the doctor because his urine is black.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The doctors back then actually thought it was some kind of internal fire, but it turned out to be a harmless genetic condition called Phenylketonuria.
Huh. Okay.
And this case from centuries ago actually tells us a lot about how genes work.
Interesting. So what's the connection?
Well, remember how genes are like instruction manuals for our bodies? They provide the blueprints for making proteins.
Right. Yeah.
And proteins are the workhorses of our cells, doing all sorts of essential tasks.
Yeah, they do things like breaking down food, transporting molecules, fighting off infections.
Exactly. And in this boy's case, he lacked a functioning enzyme due to a mutation in his genes.
A mutation.
Yeah.
So like a glitch in the instructions.
Precisely. And guess what? Enzymes are proteins.
Oh, right.
So a faulty gene means a faulty enzyme.
Hmm.
And without that enzyme working properly, a particular compound builds up in his body,
I see.
and it gets excreted in his urine, turning it black.
Wow. So a tiny change in a gene can have a visible effect, like changing the color of urine.
Exactly. It highlights how important those genes are. Now let's look at another example. Albinism.
Okay.
Have you ever seen someone with very pale skin, hair, and eyes?
Yes, I
Oh.
have. It's like they have no pigment at all.
Right. That's albinism.
Hmm.
And it's caused by a mutation in a gene involved in melanin production.
Melanin.
That's what gives color to our skin, hair, and eyes.
Oh, right, right.
So in albinism, the instruction manual for making melanin is messed up, resulting in a lack of pigment.
Like a blank page in the instruction manual.
You got it. Now, here's a question that might have popped into your head.
Okay.
If some of these gene mutations can cause problems, why do these harmful variations persist?
That's a good question.
Yes, shouldn't they have disappeared over time?
Yeah, you'd think so.
Well, it's not always so straightforward. Think about it. We inherit 2 copies of each gene, one from each parent.
Right.
And some harmful mutations are recessive.
Recessive.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, I think it means they only cause a problem if you inherit 2 copies of the faulty gene.
Exactly. And what if you inherit just 1 copy?
And you're a carrier, right?
You got it. You carry the mutation, but you don't necessarily show symptoms.
So that's how harmful alleles can hide in carrier.
Silently passing from generation to generation.
Mm.
And on top of that, mutations are constantly happening,
Mm-hmm.
introducing new variations into the gene pool.
Okay.
Some good, some bad.
It's a mix of hiding in carriers and the constant introduction of new variations that keeps these harmful alleles around.
That's right. Now let's dive into autosomal recessive inheritance.
Okay.
Autosomal simply means the gene is located on one of the numbered chromosomes, not on the sex chromosomes.
Okay.
So let's look at some specific examples of autosomal recessive disorders.
Sounds good. Like what?
Well, one you might have heard of is Tay-Sachs disease.
Tay-Sachs.
Yeah, it's a very serious condition that affects the nervous system.
Oh, wow.
Babies with Tay-Sachs appear normal at birth, but within months, their development starts to regress.
Oh, no. That sounds heartbreaking.
It is, and it all comes down to a missing enzyme in their brain cells.
A missing enzyme.
This enzyme is crucial for breaking down certain fats, and without it, those fats build up, causing damage and eventually cell death.
So it's like a cellular traffic jam with those fats clogging up the brain cells.
Exactly. And sadly, most children with Tay-Sachs don't live past the age of 5.
That's so sad. Are all autosomal recessive disorders fatal like Tay-Sachs?
Not necessarily. Another example is phenylketonuria, or PKU.
PKU.
Yeah, this one also involves a missing enzyme. But the good news is it's treatable.
Oh, that's good.
Early detection is key. So newborns are routinely screened for PKU.
Okay.
If it's diagnosed, a special diet that restricts a particular amino acid can prevent the serious developmental problems that PKU can cause.
So even though PKU is caused by a bad gene, it can be managed with early intervention.
Precisely. It's a prime example of how understanding genetics can lead to effective treatments.
Okay, so we've seen how genes can cause problems, but you mentioned that sometimes these bad genes can actually be beneficial.
I did.
I'm really curious about that.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's time to shake things up a bit.
Okay.
We're going to dive into a condition called sickle cell anemia.
Sickle cell anemia.
And it'll definitely challenge your assumptions about good versus bad genes.
Sounds intriguing. I'm ready to be challenged.
Perfect. That's what we like to hear.
All right, sickle cell anemia, you said.
Yep.
What's the deal with that one?
Well, sickle cell anemia is a great example of something called codominant inheritance.
Codominant inheritance.
Yeah. It basically means that both copies of the gene, even if they're different,
Yeah.
they both have an effect.
Oh.
It's not a simple case of one being dominant and the other recessive.
So they both kind of try to express themselves.
Exactly. Now, in sickle cell anemia, there's a tiny change in the hemoglobin protein,
Okay.
just a single amino acid difference, but it causes the red blood cells to deform into a sickle shape.
Sickle shape.
Yeah, imagine a crescent moon,
Oh, okay.
and you'll get the idea.
I can't imagine that's a good thing for red blood cells.
No, not really.
I mean, they're supposed to be nice and round.
That's right.
To flow through those blood vessels.
Precisely. And these sickle-shaped cells can cause all sorts of problems.
Oh, no. Like what?
Well, they're stiff and sticky, so they can clump together and block blood flow. This leads to pain, organ damage, and anemia, which means you don't have enough healthy red blood cells to carry oxygen throughout your body.
That's bad.
Yeah.
So where's the upside?
You're getting to it.
How can a bad gene be beneficial?
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Having one copy of the sickle cell allele can actually protect against malaria,
Malaria, huh?
the disease.
Yeah, it's a deadly parasitic disease that's prevalent in parts of Africa.
Wait, so a gene that causes a serious blood disorder can also protect against a deadly disease?
Yep.
How does that even work?
It's like a genetic trade-off, right?
Okay.
People with one normal hemoglobin allele and one sickle cell allele,
Yeah.
they have some normal red blood cells
Uh-huh.
and some sickle-shaped cells.
Right.
And those sickle-shaped cells actually make it harder for the malaria parasite to survive and multiply within the red blood cells.
Oh, interesting.
It disrupts their life cycle. So in areas where malaria is common, having one copy of the sickle cell allele is almost like having a built-in defense mechanism.
That's a great way to put it. It's a perfect example of what we call heterozygote advantage.
Heterozygote advantage.
Yeah, remember, a heterozygote is someone who has two different alleles for a trait.
Right.
So in this case, having one of each allele provides the best chance of survival in an environment where malaria is a threat.
Wow.
It's a powerful demonstration of how natural selection works.
This is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see that genetics is much more complex than I initially thought.
It really is.
It's not just about good genes and bad genes.
Yeah.
It's about how those genes interact with the environment, how they can provide advantages or disadvantages depending on the context.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about recessive inheritance.
Wow.
What about dominant inheritance?
Dominant inheritance.
Where you only need one copy of the allele to see the effect.
You got it. Let's switch gears and explore that side of inheritance. Sounds good.
Imagine a gene where just one copy is enough to make a noticeable difference.
Okay.
That's dominant inheritance.
Got it.
One example is a rare disorder called progeria.
Progeria. I've heard of that.
Have you?
It's that condition that causes children to age rapidly, right?
You're right. It's caused by a dominant mutation.
Huh.
And it leads to premature aging.
Wow.
Children with progeria develop wrinkles, hair loss, and other age-related conditions at a very young age.
That's got to be hard.
It's really difficult to live with, yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's Huntington's disease, another example of a dominant disorder.
Huntington's disease.
Uh-huh. This one is a neurodegenerative disorder that affects the brain.
Neurodegenerative.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I think it means it gets worse over time, right?
You're exactly right. It causes progressive damage to brain cells,
Oh,
leading to problems with movement, thinking, and emotions.
wow.
And sadly, it's ultimately fatal.
Both of those sound so devastating.
They are. It's amazing how a single copy of a gene can have such a powerful effect.
It really is.
Is there anything else we should know about dominant inheritance?
Well, there's another concept called incomplete dominance.
Incomplete dominance.
Yeah, remember how we talked about codominance, where both alleles have an effect?
Right.
Well, in incomplete dominance, the heterozygote doesn't fully express either the dominant or recessive trait. It's somewhere in between.
So it's not like on or off.
Exactly. It's more like a dimmer switch with varying levels of expression.
I see.
A good example of this is familial hypercholesterolemia, or FH.
FH.
It's a condition that affects cholesterol levels.
Cholesterol, that fatty substance that can build up in our arteries and cause heart problems.
That's right.
Okay.
In FH, there's a defective gene for receptors that remove cholesterol from the blood. People with 2 copies of the faulty gene have extremely high cholesterol and a very high risk of heart attacks at a young age.
Wow, that's scary. What about people who have only 1 copy of the faulty gene?
Well, they have moderately high cholesterol
Okay.
and an increased risk of heart problems.
Got it.
But it's not as severe as having 2 copies.
So you see, even within a single disorder, there can be a range of severity, depending on how many copies of the faulty gene you inherit.
Precisely.
It's all starting to come together for me now. I'm seeing how different inheritance patterns can lead to a wide variety of outcomes.
Yeah.
From harmless variations to serious disorders. It's like a complex puzzle. And each piece we learn about helps us understand the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it.
But we've been talking a lot about individual genes and specific disorders.
Yes, we have.
What about the bigger picture of inheritance?
Like how genes are passed down from generation to generation within populations.
Yeah.
That's a great transition. Let's shift our focus to population genetics.
Okay.
And explore how genes flow through groups of individuals.
Sounds good.
Have you ever heard of Punnett squares?
Punnett squares. I think I remember those from high school biology.
Do you?
They're those little grids that you use to predict the possible genotypes of offspring, right?
Exactly. They're like a genetic prediction tool.
Okay.
So let's imagine we're studying a population of American coots.
Coots.
You know, those duck-like birds with the distinctive red bills.
Oh, yeah. I've seen them at the park. They're always so busy paddling around.
Right. Now, let's say there's a gene that controls their plumage color.
Okay.
And we'll use the letter A for the dominant allele, which codes for normal coloration, and A for the recessive allele, which leads to albinism.
So we're talking about the same concept we discussed with albinism in humans.
Yes.
But now applied to our feathered friends.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, in our coot population, let's start with a mix of genotypes.
Okay.
We'll say 50% are heterozygous, meaning they carry 1 copy of each allele.
Ah.
Yep. 25% are homozygous dominant, with 2 copies of the dominant allele. And 25% are homozygous recessive, with 2 copies of the recessive allele. You got it.
Yeah.
So we've got a diverse gene pool to work with.
What happens next?
Well, it's mating season.
Ooh, exciting.
So we're going to simulate random mating among these coots.
Okay.
Imagine each coot has 2 index cards,
Okay.
one representing each allele they carry. They shuffle their cards behind their backs and randomly select one to pass on to their offspring.
So it's like a genetic lottery.
Yes.
Determining the genotype of the next generation.
Exactly.
This is fun.
It is. But here's where things get even more interesting.
Oh.
Let's introduce a little bit of natural selection into the mix.
Is that selection?
Let's say those homozygous recessive coots. Yeah, the ones with albinism.
Right.
They have a lower survival rate because they're more visible to predators.
Their lack of camouflage makes them easy targets.
Exactly. So in our simulation, we could remove some of the A offspring
Okay.
to represent that lower chance of survival.
That makes sense. What if the allele also gave them some benefit, like resistance to a disease?
Now you're thinking like a true geneticist.
Am I?
You are. That's a fantastic point.
Okay.
It's like the sickle cell example we discussed.
Right.
A seemingly harmful allele can provide a benefit in certain circumstances.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
Exactly. We have a trade-off here. The A coots are more vulnerable to predators, but they might be more resistant to this disease. The A coots have good camouflage, but are susceptible to the disease. And the heterozygotes, they might have a bit of both.
Okay.
Decent camouflage and some disease resistance.
So the heterozygotes might have a survival advantage in this scenario.
You got it. Just like with sickle cell anemia.
It all comes down to this delicate balance.
Yes.
Between the costs and benefits of different genetic variations.
Precisely.
And we repeat this over many generations, right? To see how the frequencies of those alleles change.
Exactly. The frequencies won't stay the same over time.
No.
No, the frequencies will shift as natural selection favors certain genotypes over others.
This is really making me think about how evolution works on a genetic level.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
It's not just about survival of the fittest, a general sense.
Yep.
It's about the survival of the genes that best equip organisms to thrive in their environment.
You're getting it. Natural selection acts on those tiny variations in genes,
Right.
shaping the genetic makeup of populations over time.
Amazing.
So we've talked about genes, we've talked about alleles.
Yeah.
Now, let's zoom out even further and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
Chromosome.
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 Remember those?
Yeah, they're like the organized bundles of DNA.
Exactly. And sometimes things can go wrong with those chromosomes.
Oh, right, like chromosomal abnormalities.
Is that it? It's like having a whole chapter messed up, not just a single sentence in the instruction manual.
Okay, so what kind of things can go wrong with chromosomes?
Well, one common issue is aneuploidy.
Aneuploidy.
Yeah, it means there's an extra or missing chromosome.
Mm.
You've probably heard of Down syndrome. Down syndrome, yes.
It's caused by an extra chromosome, right?
It's also known as trisomy 21, I think?
Yes, because there are 3 copies of chromosome 21 instead of the usual 2.
Okay.
And this extra chromosome causes those characteristic features and developmental differences we see in people with Down syndrome.
Like distinctive facial features, intellectual disabilities, and sometimes heart defects.
Exactly. So having an extra chromosome can really disrupt normal development.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Is it only extra chromosomes that are a problem?
Well, no.
What if a chromosome's missing?
That can also cause serious issues.
Like what?
Well, there's Turner syndrome, which affects females.
Turner syndrome.
They have only one X chromosome instead of the usual 2.
I see. And what happens in Turner syndrome?
Well, girls with Turner syndrome are often shorter than average,
Okay.
and they might have delayed puberty.
Mm-hmm.
They can also have heart defects and kidney problems.
So it's not just about having extra genetic material.
Right.
Missing a chromosome can also cause significant problems.
Yes, exactly.
It's amazing how even small changes in chromosome number can have such big effects on the body.
It really is. And it's not just the number of chromosomes that can be affected.
Oh, what else?
Well, chromosomes can also have structural abnormalities.
Structural abnormality.
Yeah, things like deletions, duplications, inversions, and translocations.
Those sound complicated.
Well, think of it like this.
Okay.
The chromosome is a book with all the genetic instructions.
Right.
A deletion is like ripping out a page.
Okay.
Some information is just gone.
I get it.
A duplication is like accidentally photocopying a page twice.
Okay.
You have extra copies of some of the instructions.
Makes sense.
An inversion happens when a piece of the chromosome breaks off, flips over,
Okay.
and reattaches in the reverse order.
I see.
It's like taking a sentence out of the book,
Right.
flipping it backward, and sticking it back in.
And a translocation.
A translocation is when a chunk of one chromosome breaks off and attaches to a totally different chromosome. Like taking a page from one book and sticking it into a different book altogether.
Okay, so these structural abnormalities can really mess up the genetic instructions.
Exactly. They can disrupt how genes function and lead to a variety of health problems.
So how do these chromosomal errors happen? Are we just unlucky sometimes?
Well, sometimes mistakes happen during cell division,
Okay.
especially meiosis, which is the process that creates eggs and sperm.
So it's like a copying error
Yeah.
when the genetic material is being distributed to new cells.
And just like typos in a book, these errors can have big or small consequences depending on what's affected.
I see, so it's a matter of chance.
In a way, yes, but our environment can also play a role.
Our environment.
Exposure to things like radiation or certain chemicals can damage chromosomes.
That's a good reminder that our genes aren't isolated.
Nope.
They interact with the world around us.
Exactly. Our lifestyle and environment can influence how our genes are expressed and even whether errors occur.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We started with a boy with black urine
Yeah.
and ended up exploring the intricacies of chromosomes.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. It's incredible to think about how much information is packed into our DNA
It really is.
and how it all works together to make us who we are.
So, what are some key takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest one is that genes are powerful.
Yes.
They shape who we are, influence our health, and connect us to all living things.
They really do.
But genes don't tell the whole story.
No, they don't.
Inheritance is complex,
Very.
and our environment plays a crucial role, too.
It's all interconnected.
It is. And as we've seen, things aren't always black and white in genetics.
Nope.
There are surprising twists and turns.
Like a bad gene being beneficial in some situations.
Exactly. And with new tools like genetic testing,
Yeah.
we're learning more and more about our genes.
It's exciting.
It is, but it also comes with ethical considerations that we need to think about carefully.
That's a good point.
It's been fascinating exploring the world of genes and inheritance with you.
I've enjoyed it too.
And I hope our listeners are walking away with a deeper appreciation for the wonders of genetics and how it all connects to our lives.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Anytime.